Note, all Bible quotes in this presentation are from the 1611 King James Bible, as translated out of the original language Hebrew. In the previous presentation, we did allude to the fact that not all black people are descendants of Ham, the youngest son of Noah, and that the Bantu people, and their brothers in West Africa, are that class of blacks who are not Hamites. According to Zondervan Bible Dictionary, Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. Zondervan Bible Dictionary makes a clear difference between the Negroes and the descendants of Ham. The Hamites, which are simply the ancient Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites, were all dark races. In the Bible, Africa is known as the land of Ham, meaning that the Hamites are the real Africans, but not the Negroes. Psalms chapter 105, verse 23. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. Anciently, the descendants of Ham lived in North, South, West, and East Africa, and what we call the Middle East today. When they were at their high noon of prosperity, they traveled the world and settled in almost every area of it. After losing world domination, the Hamites who lived outside of Africa, were called by many names by their conquerors. Names such as the Aborigines, Native Americans, Native Asians, or Indians. Some in Africa were called San, Bush, or Khoi people. The light-skinned Egyptians, Ethiopians, Asians, and Native Americans we see today, are nothing but mixed races, and should not be confused with the ancient Hamites. Having established the fact that there is a clear difference between the descendants of Ham and the Negroes, the question that then arises is, who are the Negroes? And where do they come from? According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, the Negro properly so called is dark-skinned, with woolly hair and other characteristics, while differing in minor traits. The word Negro was used by the Spanish and Portuguese to refer to the Bantu peoples that they encountered in southern Africa. Negro was also used in reference to West Africans. Wikipedia, the online free encyclopedia, states the following about the word Negro. Around 1442, the Portuguese first arrived in southern Africa while trying to find a sea route to India. The term Negro, literally meaning black, was used by the Spanish and Portuguese as a simple description to refer to the Bantu peoples that they encountered. Negro denotes black in Spanish and Portuguese, derived from the Latin word niger, meaning black, which itself is probably from a Proto-Indo-European root nekho, to be dark, akin to nakho, night. Negro was also used of the peoples of West Africa in old maps labeled Negro Land, an area stretching along the Niger River. So, the people who were called Negroes were those speaking Niger-Congo and Niger-Congo, Bantus, language family. Remember that, Zondervan Bible Dictionary distinguished the Negroes from the Hamites. Many black people do not know their true history. In fact, most of them do not even know, or see that their culture is actually Hebrew culture. The history of the Negroes in the Bible is very deep. For this reason, we have to go back into the history of black people to explain where they came from. But before we do that, we ought to understand the history of ancient Israel, because Israel was not originally called Israel, it was called Greater Africa. Here is a short quick version of what really happened. When King David was in power, he ruled over all the 12 tribes of Israel, which was one nation at the time. When King Solomon sat on the throne as the king of Israel, he went off into sin, and as a result, the Most High divided the kingdom of Israel into 2 separate kingdoms, namely the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom was known as the House of Judah, and consisted of only 3 tribes, Judah, Levi, and half the tribe of Benjamin. The northern kingdom was called the house of Israel or just Israel, and sometimes as the largest numerical tribe called Ephraim. It comprised the remaining 10 tribes of Israel. You can find the whole story about the division of Israel into 2 kingdoms, in the book of 1 Kings chapter 11, and 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 9 to 12. These 2 kingdoms were considered, by the Most High and the people who lived in them, to be 2 separate kingdoms and 2 separate nations. It is estimated that this separation took place in 721 BCE. After the split, the southern kingdom of Israel went into several captivities because of disobedience. There was the Babylonian captivity, Medo-Persian captivity, Greek captivity, and Roman captivity. As a result of these captivities, Israelites from the house of Judah were scattered all over the world, including Africa. Meanwhile, early on, just after the split of Israel, the northern kingdom had gotten very wicked in the sight of the Most High. They practiced witchcraft and idolatry, which was against the law. And because of this, the God of Israel brought Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, against the house of Israel, and he took the entire nation to his kingdom as slaves. These 10 tribes of Israel lived in Assyria for many years, until the empire was about to fall. When Assyria was on the brink of collapse, the 10 tribes of Israel fled to Africa for refuge. The book of 2nd Esdras, from the Apocrypha in the 1611 King James Bible, chapter 13, verse 40 to 47. Those are the 10 tribes, which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Osea the king, whom Salmanasar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, and go forth into a further country, where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood, till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely, of 1.5 years, and the same region is called Arsaroth. Then dwelt they there until the latter time, and now when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through, therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. After leaving Asilia, the 10 tribes of Israel never went back to their land, instead, they crossed the Euphrates River, and went into a region called Arsaroth. Claudius Ptolemy was one of the explorers to draw maps of the area called Arsaroth. According to his discovery, there were places and rivers that were called Asaroth, near ancient Mauritania in northwest Africa. Another ancient map drawn by Martin Wald-Siemler, shows an area called Asaroth somewhere in North Africa. So, the 10 tribes of Israel fled to North Africa after the Assyrian captivity. This is also consistent with the prophecies given in the Bible, that the northern kingdom of Israel would return to Africa. Before we give biblical evidence of this, it is important to know that, in ancient biblical times, the continent of Africa was known by many names. It was called Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya, Sudan, among others. So, in the Bible, every time you see names such as Phut or Libya, Egypt, and Ethiopia, just know it is talking about Africa. Hosea chapter 9, verse 1 to 3, and 6. Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy, as other people, for thou hast gone a whoring from thy God, thou hast loved a reward upon every corn floor. The floor and the winepress shall not feed them, and the new wine shall fail in her. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria. For, lo, they are gone because of destruction, Egypt shall gather them up, Memphis shall bury them, the pleasant places for their silver, nettles shall possess them, thorns shall be in their tabernacles. So, the Bible confirms further, of the fact that the northern kingdom of Israel, also known as Ephraim, returned to Africa, the land of Ham. Nahum chapter 3, verse 9. Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was infinite, Put and Lubim were thy helpers. In biblical times, Central, Southern and East of Africa, was called Ethiopia. North Africa was called Egypt, Phut, or Libya. The 10 tribes of Israel migrated from Asilia, and settled in these areas of Africa, and they are still there to this day. According to Eldad Hadani, an Israelite from the tribe of Dan, and a traveler who lived around the 9th century, the tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher journeyed to Havilah near Ethiopia, in Africa. They lived there as nomads, and later formed their own kingdom. Encyclopedia Judaica states that, Eldad Hadani, late 9th century, traveler. His origins and personality remain a mystery. He professed to belong to the tribe of Dan, hence his name Hadani. Eldad claimed that the Danites together with the tribes of Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, while leading a nomadic existence, formed an independent kingdom under the rule of their king Adil, or Uzziel. Their kingdom was in Havilah, the land of gold, see Genesis chapter 2, verse 11, near Ethiopia. Notice that the tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were all from the northern kingdom of Israel, also known as the house of Israel or Ephraim. Later on in history, and while the 10 tribes of Israel from the northern kingdom were in Africa, the house of Judah got very wicked as well, and as a result, they went through several captivities. Because of these captivities, Judah was scattered to the nations, and of course, the countries of Africa are among those nations. Those, of the southern kingdom of Israel, who were able to flee, joined Ephraim in Africa. Some were sold as slaves to African merchants. Consequently, Africa had Israelites from both the northern and southern kingdom, which, as you may know, were made up of 12 tribes. In the days of the Maccabees, the Israelites from the southern kingdom of Israel were already in Africa. 2 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 1, from the Apocrypha in the 1611 King James Bible, the brethren, the Jews that be at Jerusalem and in the land of Judea, wish unto the brethren, the Jews that are throughout Egypt, health and peace. Even when the Romans were about to invade Jerusalem, many Israelites of the house of Judah fled to Africa for refuge. Luke chapter 21, verse 20-21. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. Rudolph R. Windsor, in his book called From Babylon to Timbuktu, stated that, in the year 65 BC the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state, with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period of Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews, Israelites, fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. Millions of Israelites who escaped the persecution of the Roman Jewish war fled into the interiors of Africa. In his book Jewish Roots in Africa, Mr. Lichtblau, speaking of the Israelites that ran into Africa, says this: pressed under sweeping regional conflicts, Jews settled as traders and warriors in Yemen, the Horn of Africa, Egypt, the Kingdom of Cush and Nubia, North African Punic settlements, Carthage and Volubilis, and areas now covered by Mauritania. More migrants followed these early Jewish settlers to northern Africa. In the 14th and 15th century, many black Jews throughout Europe were banished and sent to the west coast of Africa as slaves. These Israelites joined their brethren, who were already in Africa, because of the several captivities they faced. John Ogilvy wrote a book entitled Africa, being an accurate description of the regions of Egypt, Barbary, Libya, and Bilad al-Jarak, and the following is what he wrote on page 34 of his book. Many Jews also are scattered over this region, some natives, boasting themselves of the Abraham seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger, others are Asia strangers, who fled thither either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian, or from Judea wasted and depopulated by the Romans. Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe whence they were banished. Out of some parts of Italy in the year 1342. Out of Spain in the year 1462. Out of the Low Countries in 1350. Out of France in 1403. Out of England in 1422. These all differ in habit, and are divided into several tribes, having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised of all nations, and so abominated by the Turks, that they are not admitted to be Mahometans, unless first baptized, and then no otherwise made use of, than to receive their customs, and gather in their taxes. So, there were Israelites scattered on the region of West Africa, on both sides of the river Niger. Those who regarded themselves to be natives, boasting themselves to be Abraham's seed, were actually from the northern kingdom of Israel, and they came to Africa first. Whereas, those who considered themselves to be strangers, who fled there, either from the invasion of Judea by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe whence they were banished, were, in fact, from the southern kingdom of Israel, and came to Africa second. These two classes of Israelites differed in habit, and were divided into several tribes, because, after the split of Israel, the house of Israel, and the house of Judah became two separate kingdoms, and two separate nations. That is why the Bantus and the Negroes in West Africa, are said to belong to the same language family called Niger-Congo A, and Niger-Congo B, Bantu. Remember that, according to 2 Esdras chapter 13, verse 40-47, the 10 tribes of Israel took counsel among themselves to leave Assyria, and go to a further country, called Arsareth, where no man dwelt. And we did show that Arsareth was a region in North Africa, and that the house of Israel crossed the river Euphrates to get there. By the way, when the Israelites thought of a place to flee to where no man dwelt, North Africa was a perfect choice because they were familiar with it, and there were places there where man never set foot. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 6. Neither said they, Where is the Lord that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and of pits, through a land of drought, and of the shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through, and where no man dwelt. In fact, as late as the 1800s, there were still places in Africa where no man dwelt. British historian, Basil Davidson, when exploring regions of Africa, said the following: Now the task was to stake out frontiers in utterly uncharted land. Said the French Prime Minister, we have embarked on a gigantic steeplechase into the unknown. The British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury was to say of this period, we've been engaged in drawing lines on maps where no man's foot has ever trod. Many historians trace the origin of the Bantus to the Middle Eastern area, around the mouths of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. J. F. Van Oord, an historian and author of a book entitled The Origin of the Bantu, wrote that, there have been two Bantu invasions of Africa. The second Bantu invasion of Africa started from the mouths of the Tigris and Euphrates, and probably took place about the year 680 BC. So, according to J. F. Van Oord, the Bantus are not original Africans, and that they invaded Africa in two ways. He traces their origin to the mouths of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Bible scholars assert that the lost 10 tribes of Israel migrated from Assyria, before the Assyrian invasion of 724 BC. Interesting enough, J. F. Van Oord stated that the second Bantu invasion of Africa took place about the year 680 BC, exactly before the Assyrian invasion happened in 724 BC. What J. F. Van Oord called two Bantu invasions of Africa, were actually flights of the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel, to Africa. The Lemba people, one of the Bantu tribes in sub-Saharan Africa, have a very strong oral history and tradition which shows that they are descendants of ancient Israelites. According to Lemba oral tradition, thousands of years ago, the Lemba people were forced out of Israel, and settled in a place called Sirna, which is believed to be modern-day Yemen. There they lived as traders and craftsmen, until war or natural disaster pushed them across the Red Sea, and into northeast Africa. From there, they migrated further south into southern Africa. Along the way, the Lemba state that they built great stone cities. The Lembas are not the only Negroes who know that they're Israelites and not Africans. Dirk Lang in his book, Origin of the Yoruba and the Lost Tribes of Israel, wrote that, according to Oyo Yoruba tradition, the ancestral Yoruba saw the Assyrian conquests of the Israelite kingdom from the 9th to the 8th centuries BC, from the perspective of the Israelites. After the fall of Samaria in 722 BC, they were deported to eastern Syria and adopted the ruling Assyrian kings as their own. The Igbo people of Nigeria also have oral traditions stating that they traveled from Morocco to Nigeria, and that they are known as the sons of Gad, one of the tribes of Israel. In short, the Negroes moved from the Middle East to North Africa. Some of them settled there, but many went to West Africa. And then, eventually, the Bantus, leaving some of their brothers and sisters in West Africa, migrated to Central, Southern, and East of Africa. Initially, when the Bantus were in West Africa, they called themselves Yahuns, which in Aramaic Hebrew, is Yehud, meaning Judah. The capital of Cameroon, to this day, is Yaoundé, which also in Hebrew means Judah. There was a time in history, when the Bantus of southern Africa called themselves Azanians. In 1930 there were excavations at Mapungubwe, in the area of Limpopo River, which revealed the skeletal remains of people that became known as ancient Azanians. According to James Strong's Dictionary of the Bible, the name Azania is Azanja, which means an Israelite. The Bantus called themselves Azanians, which in Hebrew means Israelites. Once a contemporary of Enoch Suntanga, the composer of Nkosi Sikalila Africa, Reverend J. H. Soga, made reference to how the Bantu people, in what is called South Africa today, came to be called Bantu, instead of their old name Azanians. He explained, in 1928, that the name Bantu was of modern application, and that it arose when Dr. Bleek, a scholar of Azanian languages, used the word Bantu, as a comprehensive term for all the dialects of the inhabitants, who formed a large section of the people of southern Africa. He asserted that Dr. Bleek had no intention of applying this term to the people themselves. So, the Bantus called themselves Israelites before the white man came to South Africa. Lisa H. Maki wrote a book entitled, Purity and Exile, in which he stated that, we are the descendants of Israelites. History says so. This was seen in 1972 when President Michael Mikombero proclaimed on the radio that we are Israelites. Our habits resemble very much the habits of the Israelites. All the Hutus who were captured to be killed, they behaved like sheep, and they did nothing but praying and singing only. This demonstrates how we resemble the Israelites. The Israelites, before attacking a country, first of all pray to God. We are the first Bantus who came to Africa. We are Bantus, thus Israelites. This demonstrates that we had a democracy before the Tutsi came. It was good. There were no distinctions of race. The Zulus, another Bantu tribe in sub-Saharan Africa, like many other Bantu tribes, also knew this to be true. In a book entitled, Jews of Ethiopia, The Birth of an Elite, edited by Tudor Parfit, and Emanuela Trevisan Semi, the following is written, in 1901, the linguist and magistrate, James Stewart spent a day at the Royal Hotel in Ladysmith, interviewing 3 Zulu elders in an attempt to recreate something of the Zulu past. In these conversations one of the Zulus, Lazarus Mkaba, traced Zulu history back to ancient Israel and Greece. Mkaba was convinced that it was the Zulus who in fact were the lost children of Israel, and that they would be redeemed when they remembered, and started worshipping their lost and unknown God. As we have seen, many of the South African tribes had been awarded an Israelite pedigree. Others, such as the Western Sotho or Tswana who inhabited the northern and eastern grazing areas of the Kalahari, were likened to the ancient Israelites, and some observers did note similarities between their customs and those mentioned in the Bible. Not long after Mach had made his momentous discovery, efforts were made to show that Jews had once lived at Great Zimbabwe. In no time at all, the Kernga-speaking Shona people, and specifically the Lemba tribe, were being enlisted as Jews and defined in precisely the same way as so many other African tribes and groups had been before and since. In the same book, the following is noted: northward of Katanga lives one of the greatest tribes of Central Africa, the Baluba, who are of undoubted Semitic origin. The name Baluba means the lost tribe, and their language and customs have many Hebrew affinities. Their name for, and idea of God, with their word for water and people and many other words and ideas, show their Semitic strain. The idea of a Jewish identity for the Luba has recently been described in a publication of the United States Institute of Peace. Since the early 1960s, the report observes, Luba administrative, social, and commercial elites have spread all over the Congo country. As early as the 1960s, the Baluba regarded themselves as the Jews of the Congo, and some of their most notorious leaders, for example J. Ngalula, were called Moisi. They felt persecuted by most of the other ethnic constituencies, who disliked the privileges the Baluba allegedly garnered under the white administration. During the Second Republic, they remained highly visible in politics. President Mobutu's strategy was to consistently absorb the Luba elite into the highest levels of the political hierarchy, in order to better control it. Since 1978, one of the harshest opponents of the regime among the Luba elite has been Etienne Tshisekedi, later named the Zairian Moisi, who, together with 10 fellow Kasaïans, led a protracted struggle against Mobutu. In almost all the regions and provinces, the Luba diaspora is implicitly accused of wanting power only for its own people. Like the Shabans, the Luba are threatened with expulsion by the native sons. The grievances of the Jews of Zaire once again resonate. After the fall of the Lubalunda Empire, some of the Baluba fled to Zambia. And they settled in Luapula, northern, Muchinga, Copperbelt, and northwestern provinces of Zambia, and called themselves Bimbas, Lundas, Kaondes, among other tribal names. It is also interesting to note that, 3 of all Bantu tribes in Zambia, namely Tolnga, Ila, and Lenji, known as Bantu Botatwe, meaning 3 peoples, are mainly known for their many cattle. Remember that the 3 tribes of Israel, Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, were also known for having a lot of cattle. Numbers chapter 32, verse 1-5 and 33. Now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of cattle, and when they saw the land of Jazer, and the land of Gilead, that, behold, the place was a place for cattle, the children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and spake unto Moses, and to Eleazar the priest, and unto the princes of the congregation, saying, Ataroth, and Dibon, and Jazer, and Nimrah, and Heshbon, and Elealeh, and Shabam, and Nebo, and Bean, even the country which the Lord smote before the congregation of Israel, is a land for cattle, and thy servants have cattle. Wherefore, said they, if we have found grace in thy sight, let this land be given unto thy servants for a possession, and bring us not over Jordan. And Moses gave unto them, even to the children of Gad, and to the children of Reuben, and unto half the tribe of Manasseh the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og king of Bashan, the land, with the cities thereof in the coasts, even the cities of the country round about. Even the name Zambia, and that of one of its rivers, Zambezi, leaves much to be desired, because, during the Greek captivity, there was an Israelite of the house of Judah, named Zambes. 1 Esdras chapter 9, verse 26 and 34. Of them of Israel, of the sons of Pharas, Hirmaz, and Edias, and Melchias, and Malus, and Eleazar, and Asibias, and Benias. And of the sons of Azara, Sesses, Esrel, Azalus, Samatus, Zambes, Josephus. Bantu culture is Hebrew culture. There are many Bantu customs which show that the Bantus are the true and original descendants of ancient Israelites. This is well noted in a book called, Jews of Ethiopia, The Birth of an Elite. Captain Alan Gardner took the customs of the Zulus to be apparently of Jewish origin. Some of the customs he enumerated included circumcision, the tradition of a younger brother marrying the widow of his deceased brother, levirate marriage, the daubing of the lintels of homes in times of sickness, the festival of the first fruits, and so on. Throughout the 1850s, Zulus were identified as Jews. Their settled, pastoral life and their religious and social customs were evidence enough of this. Gr. Peppercorn, the magistrate of Pafuna location, observed to the Native Affairs Commission that in fact the Zulus practiced a sort of ancient Judaism. A general type of the customs and laws of the Amazulu may be found in the early history of the Hebrews. Peppercorn suggested that any European who wanted to understand Zulu customs had only to read the Old Testament. Zulu polygamy, marriage customs, even attitudes towards work were all described in the appropriate biblical passage. Henry Francis Finn, who had established a small Zulu chieftaincy in the 1820s and had spent decades living among them, noted, "I was surprised to find a considerable resemblance between many of the Zulu customs and those of the Jews. These included war offerings, sin offerings, propitiatory offerings, festival of first fruits, periods of uncleanness, on the decease of relatives and touching the dead, circumcision, rules regarding chastity, rejection of swine's flesh." Finn concluded that in view of the nature of semblance of many of their customs to those of the ancient Jews, as prescribed under the Levitical priesthood, I am led to form the opinion that the Zulu tribes have been very superior to what they are at the present time. Colenso was convinced that the two Zulu names for God embraced perfectly the notions of the divine contained in the Hebrew words Elohim and Jehovah. So close indeed were the resemblances, according to Bishop Colenso, that he frequently suggested that anyone who wanted to really understand the Bible had best study Zulu customs. Zulu habits and even the nature of their country so nearly correspond to those of the ancient Israelites, that the very scenes are brought continually, as it were, before their eyes, and vividly realized in a practical point of view. Practically everything about the Zulus, from their lunar calendar to the order of religious feasts, seemed to reflect an Israelite past. The Zulu keeps his annual feasts, and observes the new moons as the old Hebrew did. The very Zulus have their festivals at the beginning of the southern spring and at the end of our autumn, corresponding to the Feast of the First Fruits and the Feast of the Ingathering of the ancient Hebrews. Many customs of the Zulus, maintained Nkaba, were common to Jews as well. He specifically mentioned the butchering of sacrificial meat and the burning of incense for sacrificial and other ritual purposes. He also maintained that the Jews, like the Zulus, slit their earlobes. Hebrew customs are also seen among many West African tribes. In West Africa, an Israelite discourse was imminent. G.T. Bastons among the Igbos of Nigeria, casually noted that the Igbos were possessed of certain customs which rather pointed to Levitic influence at a more or less remote period. This is suggested in the underlying ideas concerning sacrifice and in the practice of circumcision. Jewish customs, too, were found aplenty in Ashanti rituals, from marriage rites to purification ceremonies and menstrual seclusion. Jews of Ethiopia, the birth of an elite. Hebrew customs, like maternal seclusion, circumcision, menstrual seclusion, funeral purification, levirate marriage, polygamy, among others, are, to this day, still practiced by black people in sub-Saharan Africa. Even the traditional attire of the Bantus shows that they're the true and original descendants of ancient Israelites. Ancient Israelites wore bonnets, bracelets on the legs or arms, headbands, earrings, rings and nose jewels, just as the Bantus. Isaiah chapter 3, verse 18-23. In that day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet and their calls, and their round tires like the moon, the chains and the bracelets, and the mufflers, the bonnets and the ornaments of the legs, and the headbands, and the tablets, and the earrings, the rings, and nose jewels, the changeable suits of apparel, and the mantles, and the wimples, and the crisping pins, the glasses, and the fine linen, and the hoods, and the veils. Traditionally, the Bantus wear girdles and garments with fringes on them, as commanded in the Torah. Leviticus chapter 8, verse 13. And Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 12. And Moses brought Aaron's sons, and put coats upon them, and girded them with girdles, and put bonnets upon them, as the Lord commanded Moses. Thou shalt make thee fringes upon the four quarters of thy vesture, wherewith thou coverest thyself. The traditional attire of the Bantus and many West Africans is greatly inspired by the Levitical law. Bantu cultural practices are actually Hebrew customs. You won't find these cultural practices among Europeans or Arabs. The languages that black people speak in sub-Saharan Africa also show that they're Hebrews. Niger-Congo languages are dialects of ancient Hebrew. Bantu languages are similar, they have similar alphabets, and meanings of words as compared to the Hebrew language. In a book entitled, Jews of Ethiopia, The Birth of an Elite, the following is stated: according to Baston, the Igbo language had interesting parallels with the Hebrew idiom. To this day the Igbos themselves cherish the notion that they are somehow descended from the people of Israel. The idea that Igbo and Hebrew, or Ivri, are one and the same word and that the two languages are closely related is quite widespread. A full-blooded Israelite theory, with respect to the Ashanti, was presented in a detailed study published in 1930, by Joseph J. Williams, a Jesuit member of the Royal Geographical Society, as well as of the American Geographical Society, who found traces of Hebrew in the Ashanti language. Not a few Hebrew words and possible certain distinctive Hebrew constructions have been grafted on the native languages of the Ashanti. He took the name Ashanti to mean the sons of Ashan, which he declared to be a city in Judea. The root words of the Bantu dialects are still ancient Hebrew. The fact that a root word has no prefix or suffix makes it the most basic part of a word, so the ability to find the root words of Hebrew in the Bantu languages show that Bantu languages are dialects of Hebrew. In linguistics, a root word holds the most basic meaning of any word. It's what's left after you remove all the affixes, hence the fact that one can find the root words of the Hebrew language through Bantu languages, only means the languages must be one and the same. One can find in the Strong's Hebrew Concordance that they take you to what they call the primitive root of words, but since Hebrew is not their original language, they could only go but so far into the root words. On the other hand, since the Bantu languages are dialects of Hebrew, one can find the actual primitive root of what the Concordance deems to be a primitive root, thus showing that the actual primitive, ancient, roots of the Hebrew language are still reserved in the true Hebrew language, which is known as Bantu languages today. For example, the English language comes from Greek and Latin. The English word Alexander is comprised of two Greek root words because Greek is the origin of English. In Greek Alexan means to defend, and Aner means man, hence the English word Alexander means man defender. This is a key indication that Greek is the origin of English. Now apply this concept to compare the Hebrew language with the Bantu language, and you will find that the Hebrew words are comprised of Bantu root words to this day, showing that the Bantus still retain the Hebrew language, and that Yiddish is a corruption of the language. This fact also shows that Bantu root words were and are actually Hebrew by evidence of them still correlating to the ancient language to this day. For example, let's look at the Hebrew word H6005, is Immanuel, which is Emmanuel in English, and means with us is God. In Igbo, the word Imi Onu Allah means with us is God, or God with us, which is the same thing it meant in the Hebrew Concordance, and the same interpretation that Matthew gave in Matthew's chapter 1 verse 23. Imi no Allah is a three-word sentence which means, within rests God in Igbo. Also in the Yoruba dialect, the word no means is, so when combining the Bantu root words, Imi no Allah, means within is God or God is within, because the Bantu speakers still speak Hebrew as they did in the scriptures. It is amazing that from ancient days of the prophets in the Hebrew script, the words still have the same meaning in Bantu today. Another example, the word H5921 or H5920 is il, which means upward, height, above, upon. The il makes an e sound in this word. Here il is pronounced elu, which still means the same thing in Igbo, Bantu, because elu means up, height, above, upon in their language up to this day. Another example, the word ruler H8269 shore, which means to rule, reign. The sh makes a strong sh sound like ch. In Igbo Shirai still means ruler, reign. The word literally has not changed from its original meaning or pronunciation from the Hebrew text. The Hebrew word for we is H859, any, and in the Igbo language the word to this day for we is still enyi, which is the same exact word as in the Hebrew script. HebrewReaders.com. Henry Callaway, the first bishop for Confraria, once stated that the Zulu is a highly elaborated language, much more so than Hebrew, which in some respects it resembles. It is not only the Zulu language that closely resemble Hebrew but all Bantu languages. In fact, there are many Bantu words that bear strong resemblance to Hebrew words. For example, in Hebrew, bar or ben means son, and in the Bantu language it is bena, bana, or bar. Water in Hebrew is mayim, while in the Bantu's language it is mai. In Hebrew, 7 is sheba, whereas in Bantu it is saba or samba. Thanks or praise is toda in the Hebrew, and in the Bantu's language it is tondo or matondo. In Hebrew to marry is baal, while in Bantu it is bala. In Hebrew to play or laugh is sakak, and in Bantu's it is tsaka or sirka. In Hebrew the word angel is malik, in Bantu it is malaika. A barber in Hebrew is galab, in Bantu it is gala, or ogailitsa. The word for peace in Hebrew is shalom, whereas in a Bantu language it is salama. In the Bantu's language, power is called Yahabi, similar to the shortened Hebrew name of God Yah, which is translated as Jah in the King James Bible, as can be seen in Psalms chapter 68 verse 4. In Hebrew, Yahabi means Yah is the Father. King David nephew Joab, pronounced in Hebrew Yahab, means Yah is the Father. By the way, there are many more Bantu words, which we have not mentioned in this presentation, that are very similar to Hebrew words, and in some instances exactly the same. The information given thus far should be proof enough that all Bantu dialects and accents are Hebrew, just without using the Hebrew characters, since the Bantus were given European alphabets to write their spoken sounds, which in turn caused them to not know to this day that they are speaking Hebrew. Before the Arab slave trade happened, and of course not forgetting the transatlantic slave trade, the Israelites were already scattered all over the world through slavery. At that time, every nation on earth had Israelites, but more so in Africa than anywhere else. By the time the Arab slave trade transpired, Africa had the largest number of Israelites, of all 12 tribes, because most of them had fled there for refuge, and some were taken there as slaves. The two slave trades, the Arab and transatlantic, were just a rescattering of Israelites to the nations. Remember that the first scattering of the children of Israel was from Israel to the nations, mainly countries in Asia and Europe, and was facilitated by the Assyrian, Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and Roman captivities. The second scattering of Israel was from Africa to the nations, and it was made possible by the Arab and transatlantic slave trades. The Arab and transatlantic slave trades were a repetition of history. The people who were mainly targeted for slavery in the Arab slave trade were Bantu Israelites. The Arab slave trade reintroduced the children of Israel to the Asian continent. The Arab slave trade, established in the 8th and 9th centuries AD, began with small-scale movement of people largely from the eastern Great Lakes region and the Sahel. The trade of slaves across the Sahara and across the Indian Ocean also has a long history, beginning with the control of sea routes by Afro-Arab traders in the 9th century. It is estimated that, at that time, a few thousand enslaved people were taken each year from the Red Sea and Indian Ocean coast. They were sold throughout the Middle East. This trade accelerated as superior ships led to more trade and greater demand for labor on plantations in the region. Eventually, tens of thousands per year were being taken. On the Swahili coast, the Afro-Arab slavers captured Bantu peoples from the interior and brought them to the littoral. Between 1500 and 1900, up to 17 million African slaves were transported by Muslim traders to the coast of the Indian Ocean, the Middle East, and North Africa. Slavery in Africa, Wikipedia. In the transatlantic slave trade, mainly West African Israelites and their brethren the Bantus were captured for enslavement. The Portuguese, in the 16th century, were the first to engage in the Atlantic slave trade. In 1526, they completed the first transatlantic slave voyage to Brazil, and other Europeans soon followed. Shipowners regarded the slaves as cargo to be transported to the Americas as quickly and cheaply as possible, there to be sold to work on coffee, tobacco, cocoa, sugar, and cotton plantations, gold and silver mines, rice fields, the construction industry, cutting timber for ships, in skilled labor, and as domestic servants. While the first Africans kidnapped to the English colonies were classified as indentured servants, with a similar legal standing as contract-based workers coming from Britain and Ireland, by the middle of the 17th century, slavery had hardened as a racial caste, with African slaves and their offspring being legally the property of their owners, and children born to slave mothers were also slaves. As property, the people were considered merchandise or units of labor, and were sold at markets with other goods and services. The major Atlantic slave trading nations, ordered by trade volume, were the Portuguese, the British, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch empires. These slaves were managed by a factor who was established on or near the coast to expedite the shipping of slaves to the New World. Slaves were imprisoned in a factory while awaiting shipment. Current estimates are that about 12 million to 12.8 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic over a span of 400 years, although the number purchased by the traders was considerably higher, as the passage had a high death rate. Atlantic slave trade, Wikipedia. Despite the Arab and transatlantic slave trades, today Africa, of all the continents, has the greatest number of Israelites, mainly those of the ancient northern kingdom of Israel, also known as the Lost Ten Tribes, while some are of the house of Judah, anciently called the southern kingdom of Israel. The majority of the house of Judah were scattered to the four corners of the earth and are still living in the African diaspora to this day. Due to slavery and colonization, the majority of the descendants of Bantu and West African slaves in Africa, Asia, Europe, North and South America, Australia, and everywhere else, have forgotten the God of their fathers and do not even know that they're the true and original Israelites. This was long prophesied in the scriptures. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1-4. The vision of Isaiah the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken, I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib, but Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider. A sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters, they have forsaken the Lord, they have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger, they are gone away backward. According to the passage, a bull or a cow knows its owner, but the Israelites would not know their God. A donkey knows its master's home, but Israel would forget their home, which is God's promised land Canaan. In fact, the children of Israel were also prophesied to discontinue from their God-given heritage because of sin. However, this was only for a given period of time. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 1 and 4. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, and with the point of a diamond, it is graven upon the table of their heart, and upon the horns of your altars, and thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. This is the main reason why most black people do not know that they are the true and original descendants of ancient Israelites. They have forgotten the God of their fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the covenant he made with them. The sacred name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in Hebrew is Yah. Psalms chapter 68, verse 4. Sing unto God, sing praises to his name, extol him that rideth upon the heavens by his name Yah, and rejoice before him. As you may have seen, The King James Bible translates the sacred Hebrew name of the God of Israel Yah as Jah. The word Alleluia is of Hebrew origin. It is composed of the Hebrew H1984, Halal, and H3050, Yah, which simply means praise Yah. So, every time you say Hallelujah, you're actually saying praise you Yah. Most Hebrew names have the sacred name of God Yah in them. For example, Isaiah in Hebrew is Yeshua, which means Yah has saved. Obadiah is Obadiah, meaning serving Yah. Elijah in Hebrew is Eliyah, which means Yah is my God. Nehemiah is Nechemiah, and it means Yah comforted. In Hebrew, Zephaniah is Tzephaniah, which means Yah has secreted. Zechariah is Zechariah, which means Yah has remembered. Josiah in Hebrew is Yoshiyah, and it means founded of Yah. The greatest sin of Israel has always been idolatry, witchcraft, and the work of the occult. From the time Yah delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, the majority of Israelites always refused to worship Yah alone. They always forsook Yah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and worshipped the gods of the nations. Because of this, Yah caused the Israelites to suffer and be slaves to the Gentile nations as per the covenant he made with them. Psalms chapter 96, verse 4-5. For the Lord is great, and greatly to be praised, he is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. 1 Chronicles 16, verse 23-26. Sing unto the Lord, all the earth, show forth from day to day his salvation. Declare his glory among the heathen, his marvelous works among all nations. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, he also is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. You see, all the gods of the nations, then and now, are idols. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, Trinity God of the Christians is an idol. Allah, the God of the Muslims, is also an idol. Buddha, Shiva, and all the other gods of the Gentiles are idols. The Negroes today, just like their rebellious ancestors, are worshipping these gods of the heathens. Most of them are caught up in Christianity, worshipping Jesus, the God of the Europeans, and in Islam praying to Allah, the idol of the Arabs. Others are serving idols in secret societies such as Freemasonry, the Jesuit order, the Illuminati, and the like. Before slavery and colonization, all the gods of the heathens, that black people worship today, were unknown to them and their ancestors. This also was prophesied in the scriptures. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, wood and stone. Before the Arab and transatlantic slave trades, black people, just like their ancestors, did not know Muhammad, Jesus, Allah, Buddha, Shiva, and all the other idol gods of the heathens which they worship today. They only knew Yah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to be the creator of all things. Even though most of them at that time forsook Yah and started practicing witchcraft and voodoo, they knew that it was Yah who made all things and chose them to be a special people to himself. In most African countries today, and in other Negro nations like Haiti, the Israelites are heavily caught up in witchcraft and voodoo, especially in the rural areas. For this reason, the anger of Yah is still upon black people as a whole, and this can be seen in their suffering everywhere. Most Negro countries are very poor and heavily indebted to the Western countries, just as the Bible said would happen. While many black people, living among the heathen nations, face heavy racism, among other atrocities. All this has been because Yah is judging the Israelites for their disobedience to his laws, commandments, statutes, and judgments. Despite all this, there will come a time when Yah will cause the Negroes to remember that they're the true and original descendants of ancient Israelites. They will remember the name of the God of their fathers and be obedient to him. And then Yah will gather them from all the nations where they were scattered to through slavery, and bring them back to the land of Canaan as he promised their fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Baruch chapter 2, verse 29-35, From the Apocrypha in the 1611 King James Bible, if ye will not hear my voice, surely this very great multitude shall be turned into a small number among the nations, where I will scatter them. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people, but in the land of their captivities they shall remember themselves. And shall know that I am the Lord their God, for I will give them an heart, and ears to hear, and they shall praise me in the land of their captivity, and think upon my name, and return from their stiff neck, and from their wicked deeds, for they shall remember the way of their fathers, which sinned before the Lord. And I will bring them again into the land which I promised with an oath unto their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they shall be lords of it, and I will increase them, and they shall not be diminished. And I will make an everlasting covenant with them to be their God, and they shall be my people, and I will no more drive my people of Israel out of the land that I have given them. The awakening of the Negroes to their true identity as the Israelites of the Bible, will be the greatest phenomenon the world has ever seen. The Torah gives further evidence of this in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 1-6. And it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee, and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity, and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. If any of thine be driven out unto the outmost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee, and the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good, and multiply thee above thy fathers. And the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart, and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. The Israelites were in their blessing when they entered the land of Canaan under Joshua and possessed it as one strong nation. Since that time, the majority of the children of Israel have been facing curses because of their wickedness. Today, the blessing and the curse have already come upon Israel, and the only thing remaining is for them to remember themselves, turn to Yah their King, and confess their sins and the iniquities of their ancestors. Then, and only then, will Yah gather them from all the nations where they were scattered to through slavery, and bring them to the land of Canaan as before. Leviticus chapter 26, verse 40-45. If they shall confess their iniquity, and the iniquity of their fathers, with their trespass which they trespassed against me, and that also they have walked contrary unto me, and that I also have walked contrary unto them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if then their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, and they then accept of the punishment of their iniquity, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham. Will I remember, and I will remember the land. The land also shall be left of them, and shall enjoy her Sabbaths, while she lieth desolate without them, and they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity, even because they despised my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. And yet for all that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them, to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. But I will for their sakes remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. It is also interesting to note that Israel became a nation in Africa, Egypt, and then moved to the land of Canaan. In a way, this will repeat itself because the majority of the 12 tribes of Israel are in Africa, and in the Bible they are called the dispersed of Israel. The others, mainly of the house of Judah, are living in the African diaspora as descendants of Bantu and West African slaves, and they will be gathered from there to be one great nation again. When this happens, Israel will be the greatest superpower in history and will rule for eternity. The nations where the majority of the Israelites, mainly those of the so-called the lost 10 tribes of Israel, will be gathered from, are in Africa and what is called the Middle East today. The rest of the children of Israel will be gathered from the other continents where they were scattered to through slavery. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11 to 12 and 15 to 16, as well as chapter 43, verse 5 to 6. And it shall come to pass in that day, that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left, from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Fear not, for I am with thee, I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. I will say to the north, Give up, and to the south, Keep not back. Bring my sons from far, and my daughters from the ends of the earth, and the Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river, and shall smite it in the seven streams, and make men go over dryshod. And there shall be an highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left, from Assyria, like as it was to Israel in the day that he came up out of the land of Egypt. According to the passage, there will come a time when Yah the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will gather the Israelites from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and the islands of the sea. Assyria, Elam, Shinar, and Hamath were ancient nations in Asia. Egypt and Pathros is North Africa. Cush is sub-Saharan Africa. The islands of the sea include all the Mediterranean islands. So basically, there are Israelites in Asia and Africa. The children of Israel in Asia are simply descendants of Bantu and West African slaves, and they will be gathered from there. Those in Africa, mainly of the house of Israel who migrated there from Assyria, will be assembled. Yah will separate the Egyptian sea, which is the Nile River, for the Israelites to cross over in order for them to get to the land that Yah gave to their fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, just like he did in the days of Moses when he brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. The descendants of Bantu and West African slaves in Europe, North, South and Central America, Australia, and the other continents, are mainly of the house of Judah and will also be gathered from there. The fact that there are many Israelites scattered all over sub-Saharan Africa and that they will be gathered and brought to the land of Canaan, cannot be overemphasized. Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9 to 10. For then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord, to serve him with one consent. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. Remember that, in ancient biblical times, sub-Saharan Africa was called Ethiopia or Cush. The land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, which is simply sub-Saharan Africa, is where the Bantu people remain scattered even to this day. The previous passage confirms the fact that there are Israelites in Africa and that they will be gathered from there. Isaiah chapter 18, verse 1 to 2, and 7. Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushes upon the waters, saying, Go, yes, swift messengers, to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. In that time shall the present be brought unto the Lord of hosts of a people scattered and peeled, and from a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden under foot, whose land the rivers have spoiled, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, the Mount Zion. Sub-Saharan Africa has the largest number of scattered Israelites. The Gentile nations call them Bantus, without knowing that they, together with those in the African diaspora whose ancestors were taken from Africa as slaves, are actually the true and original descendants of ancient Israelites. This is the Great Awakening. Wake up, black people. Turn to Yah the King of your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because the time of the Gentiles is almost over. It is time for you to be gathered and taken to your homeland, the land of Canaan, as Yah promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The time for you to dominate the world and be the greatest superpower in history is almost here. Get out of all religions. Get out of Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Scientology, Freemasonry, the Illuminati, and all the other religions of the heathens. It is time to stop worshipping the idol gods of the Gentiles. Stop practicing witchcraft, voodoo, idolatry, and all the works of the occult. The time has come for you to start serving Yah, the King of Israel. Wherever you are in the world, start keeping the laws, commandments, statutes, and judgments of Yah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Worship Him alone. Say this prayer with us. Father Yah, great and awesome King, who keeps His covenant and mercy with those who love Him, and with those who keep His commandments, we have sinned and committed iniquity, we have done wickedly and rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. Neither have we heeded your servants the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings and our princes, to our fathers and all the people of Israel. Father Yah, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face, as it is this day to the men of Judah and all Israel, those near and those far off in all the countries to which you have driven them, because of the unfaithfulness which they have committed against you. Father Yah, to us belongs shame of face, to our leaders, our rulers, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To Yah our King belong mercy and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against Him. We have not obeyed the voice of Yah our King, to walk in His laws, which He set before us by His servants the prophets. Yes, all Israel has transgressed your law, and has departed so as not to obey your voice, therefore the curses and the oath written in the law of Moses the servant of Yah have been poured out on us, because we have sinned against Him. And He has confirmed His words, which He spoke against us and against our leaders who ruled over us, by bringing upon us great suffering, for under the whole heaven such has never been done as what has been done to us. As it is written in the law of Moses, all the curses have come upon us, yet we have not made our prayer before Yah our King, that we might turn from our iniquities and keep your commandments. Therefore Yah has kept great affliction in mind, and brought it upon us, for Yah our King is righteous in all the works which He does, though we have not obeyed His voice. And now, Father Yah our King, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand, and made yourself a name, as it is this day, we have sinned, we have done wickedly. Father Yah, according to all your righteousness, I pray, let your anger and your fury be turned away from your people, because for our sins, and for the iniquities of our fathers, your people are a reproach to all the Gentile nations. Father Yah, hear. Father Yah, forgive. Father Yah, listen and act. Remember the covenant you made with our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not delay for your own sake, my King, for your people that are called by your name. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Praise Yah.